Hello, welcome to the Opinionistics. I'm your host, John Mailone. In this episode, no co-host, because reasons, as always. Introducing from Waterloo, Ontario, Canada, Mark Morton.
Hello. Hi. Good to be here.
Me too. So, Mark, what is it that you do for a living?
Well, that's a good question. Um, what I do for a living in terms of making a living, getting paid, is I work at the University of Waterloo, where I work in a teaching center and I help professors teach more effectively. And I've been doing that for almost the last 18 years. Before that, I taught in an English department for about 12 years. And before that, I was doing my PhD in 16th century English literature. What I try to spend as much time on as possible is my own writing. I've written 4 books of nonfiction that were published some years ago, and then more recently I wrote a young adult dystopian novel, and that was published. And then in between there was kind of a hiatus because my wife and I adopted 4 older children. And they took all of our attention for about 15 or 16 years. So that's what I do.
Hmm, alright, that's interesting. And what was your whole life was like when growing up?
Well, I think the thing that characterized me the most was growing up in the prairies of Canada. Um, it's very flat, grain, cattle, that kind of thing, but also in a way extraordinarily bleak. And when I say flat, I mean flat. Like it's perhaps the flattest place on Earth. You can literally see, I don't know for how many miles before the horizon hits the sky. And growing up on that farm, a little poor farm in Saskatchewan, yeah, that's what affected me because I still feel it. I mean, it's in my being, and part of that even goes back to like the 1930s, as you know, after the crash of 1929, the stock market crash, but also that coincided with what is called the dirty 30s in Canada, where there was a drought for like the entire 1930s, and that impacted people immensely. In the United States, they call that the Dust Bowl. My grandmother lived through that and tried to raise all of her children, 6 children, through that without a husband because he had been killed in a farming accident. And that kind of experience that she had kind of has generational what's the word, ripples. So it made my grandmother very aware of being careful, being thrifty, things like that. The transience of things, that things can just vanish, and that was passed on to my mom. And I think I and my siblings took that from our parents. So I still feel like I'm kind of a child of the 1930s, of the dirty 30s, even though we're getting close to, well, almost a century ago.
Okay, that's cool. If you could live anywhere in the world, where would it be?
Hmm. Well, I've mentioned growing up in Saskatchewan, in the middle of Canada, and I miss that. Like I've lived in Ontario for the past 20 years. And before that, when I was doing my PhD at the University of Toronto, I was there for another 12 years or so. But I really, really miss the prairies. They have a bleak beauty. The people there are, I don't know, they're kind of unlike any other part of Canada, I think. So in a way, I wish I could still live there, but our kids are planted here, so to speak, now, so I don't think that will happen. Coming at your question from another direction, I think the most beautiful place I've ever been was Mauritius. Mauritius is off the coast of Madagascar, which is off the coast of Africa, and I was there for a week or 10 days at a conference, and it was astonishing. I mean, it was like everything that I knew growing up as a kid. The opposite was there in Mauritius. Like the weather wouldn't kill you, unlike in Saskatchewan, where there were mornings when I would get up on the farm and it would be minus 50 degrees and the wind would be howling and our house would be shaking. And in Mauritius, everything was just beautiful. It felt like one could just sort of walk around and pluck fruit from trees and, live an idyllic existence. So I would like to go back there. That was quite a place. I've also spent quite a bit of time in Saudi Arabia, helping instructors there learn more about educational technologies. And that was a fascinating experience because it was just so different from anything I was used to. But the heat was just awful. And of course, it's a more, it's an environment where you just don't have as many freedoms as in most of the rest of the world. So it felt a bit repressive. I was glad to be there, but I was also glad when I came back to Canada after that experience.
Nice. When it comes to your writing, do you have like a process that you have?
Well, yes, and there's sort of two parts to that, because before we adopted the kids, all of my books were nonfiction. And so they took a lot of research and a lot of containing of lots of information in my head at the same time. Like one of my books, for example, was about the origins and histories of food words. And so it just meant having to keep a lot of facts in my head, sort of at the tip of my fingers, so to speak. And now that I'm writing fiction, it's a very different process. And partly the reason for the shift is, having raised 4 kids, we read, my wife and I read a lot of, fiction with them, young adult fiction with them, and I got more interested in that. But the other part of it was just, my brain, my mind, my memory does not work the way it used to. I can't keep all that information in my head at the same time. But on the other hand, I think my power of imagination and my ability to tell stories has increased or been enhanced by experiences. So I've written and published 1 novel. I've finished another. Haven't sent it out to any agents or publishers yet, and I've started a 3rd. Each one is a little bit different, but the main thing I do is I kind of come up with a predicament, and then I kind of have a beginning and an end and a middle. It's like an overall arc. And then I just kind of trust the process so that I start writing. And I think the most important thing that I find is I have to develop characters or let characters develop and then follow them, see where they lead me with regard to the overall arc that I envision. I've tried writing in other ways, like I've tried writing in ways where I've come up with a very, very detailed outline. That just doesn't work. It just feels like I get hamstrung by all the detail. I've also tried just kind of free writing where I don't have any plan, and that just seems to go in circles. So I think what I've hit upon is sort of a middle ground that works for me, where I have that overall arc, but I also feel, I don't know, some sort of jazz-like process where I can follow something as it arises.
All right then. That's interesting. Are there any other jobs or opportunities you haven't done yet you want to do it at some point in your life?
That is a really good question. I'm at the stage of my life where, it would no longer really be feasible to pivot in a big way. Well, I wish. I remember when I was a kid, I was probably about 10, and my mom said to me, asked me, would I want to take piano lessons? And I said no, because I thought, oh, that's not what boys do, and I regret that so much, because I feel like it was a missed opportunity. I enjoy music so much, and yet I can't read music. I can't play an instrument, but I so much wish that I could. I try to teach myself guitar, and one of my sons is really good at guitar. So I do wish that I had followed the music path somewhat more. And I would still love to do that, but yeah, I at a certain point in one's life, some opportunities just close.
Hmm. Yes. Yes, yes. Have you heard of a drink called banana friche?
Anana friche?
Yeah.
Anana as in pineapple, the French word for pineapple?
No, banana.
Oh, banana friche. No, no, I don't think I have.
Yeah, I get that a lot, so it's understandable.
And what is it exactly?
It is a banana flavored milkshake slash smoothie that has all the tingly sensations in the world.
Okay. And does it come from a particular culture, or is it from the UK, or where?
It's just something that came from my head.
Oh, okay. Well, I love bananas. In fact, one of the things I like to do with my kids is try different kinds of fruits because there are hundreds, thousands of different fruits that when I was growing up, I was not aware of. We had bananas, oranges, apples, pears. That was about it. But, I find that when I go to an Asian market or a Middle Eastern market, Indonesian market, I'm always finding different kinds of fruits that I've never heard of, and I like to try them. And most of the time, we like them. Sometimes not. There's one called the dragon fruit, which is a beautiful fruit. It's beautiful, sort of purple, pink in color, and looks like something that you might find in a Dr. Seuss book. And yet, it has very little flavor. It's kind of a tricky fruit in that sense.
Yeah, I could see that. Where has been the furthest you traveled to that is the furthest away from where you're originally from?
Oh, that would definitely have to be Mauritius because it's literally on the opposite side of the earth of where, certainly where I currently live. Um, it's in the southern hemisphere, and so one of the things I really enjoyed when I went there was the opportunity to look at different constellations. The southern constellations, which I'd never seen before and I've never seen since. And it's an kind of eerie experience when you go out at night and you look up and the sky just looks different. It almost feels like you're on a different planet or something. So yeah, I think Mauritius would be pretty much about as far away from here as I can get. Like I think it's about 12,000 miles, half the way around the earth.
Wow, that's mad.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
your life was a meal, what kind of meal would it be?
If it was a meal, probably a paella, something with lots of different ingredients in it. It's got a solid rice foundation, but it's got shellfish and shrimp and so many other different flavors working in it. And I guess the other thing too is that when I lived in France, I lived in the south of France for a while, and whenever I would go and get paella, it would always be different depending on whatever ingredients were available at the time. So it's the kind of thing that changes according to circumstances, and that I think that kind of feels like how my life has unfolded as well.
Nice. Have you met anyone famous?
Oh, let's see. I've met well, some people who back in the day would have been considered rock stars, I guess. I don't know how famous they got outside of North America, but there was a band called the Crash Test Dummies, and I knew the lead singer fairly well. This was back in Winnipeg. That's where they were from. The literary critic Northrop Frye. He was one of my heroes, I guess, and very famous at one time in the world of literary criticism. And I've seen other people in passing, but maybe haven't spoken to them, like our current Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau. Yeah, but no, I don't think I have like a big story about, I ran into Morgan Freeman, on the subway or anything like that. No, nothing like that has ever happened to me.
Huh, okay. If someone wrote a book about you,
Mm-hmm.
what do you think its title would be?
Oh man. Well, what I would like it to be, I'm stealing this from I forget the author of this play, but it was turned into a film as well. A Man for All Seasons, because I do feel like kind of a jack of all trades, um, or what used to be called a Renaissance man, Renaissance person, um, or as a man for all seasons, in reference to what's his name from the 16th century. Wasn't Thomas More. Shoot, I can't remember his name now. But somebody who likes to learn a little bit about a lot of things. That's how I would describe myself. I'm kind of a generalist, whereas most people at the university where I work, and most universities around the world, they are specialists. They dive deep into a very narrow, and I don't mean that in a negative sense, but into a very narrow aspect of research. And what I enjoy is sort of at the other end of things, learning a lot about a bunch of things, and then trying to make connections between them. Because I think that's really important. I think that what we need more in our world, in so many ways, is more connections between people, connections between cultures, connections between the different disciplines and the arts and the sciences and things like that. I think that's the only thing that's going to save us as a species.
Yeah, absolutely. What hobby would you get into if time and money weren't an issue?
Hmm. Well, I really enjoy rocks and stones. Always have. And I still, I have a rock tumbler, and I tumble and polish rocks. And it's not an expensive hobby, because you can just go out and find rocks to tumble. But at the same time, there are some rocks that they're not found in North America or Canada or around here. Like there are places in Eastern Europe where there's some really interesting amber that can be kind of pricey and expensive to get. So yeah, I think I would like to be able to spend more time tumbling rocks, because I like how they turn out, but also the metaphor behind it is I see as important. And the way I describe it to people is I say that, anything can become beautiful if it's tumbled long enough. And I think that's true of people too, that doesn't matter how rough and ready, somebody is. It's experiences, hard experiences, challenges, things like that turns us all into hopefully beautiful people.
Fantastic. What could you give a 40-minute presentation on without any preparation?
Word origins, definitely. In fact, I probably have done that at parties and things like that, and probably ended up boring lots of people who were near me. Probably dogs as well. Our family has always had dogs. My wife and I, even before we adopted our kids, we had 4 dogs that we acquired in different ways. They were all rescues. And after we adopted our kids, one thing we discovered was that dogs are crucial for kids who are adopted at older ages, because, if a child is adopted at an older age as opposed to an infant, they have been adopted, they've been apprehended from their birth family for reasons. They've experienced trauma and awful things usually. And dogs are so good, with their unconditional love and their willingness to be adopted by kids, that I just feel like our family owes such a huge debt to the dogs that we've had. And so we've got to know dogs quite well, as individuals, as persons, so to speak. But also along the way, you learn a lot. In fact, you could probably hear one of them right now. Along the way, I've learned a lot about different breeds of dogs, and how to train them and things like that. So I could probably I'm just actually letting one out right now. I could probably easily talk about dogs, and photography. I really like taking photographs. I like capturing moments, and I could probably talk about photography, visual arts, and Shakespeare. What I taught in university was mostly Shakespeare, 16th century certainly, and I feel like I could give a pretty good, interesting 40-minute presentation on Shakespeare. And well, maybe not his plays, but what I find really interesting is the 16th century and what life was like during the 16th century, because in some ways they were so much like us, and in some ways they were so foreign from us that it's hard to apprehend. I mean, you're in Manchester, but I'm thinking about, like, when in Shakespeare's time, lots of people would walk over London Bridge, and as they walked over it, they would look up and they would see on the pikes, human heads that had been stuck there. And what would it be like to grow up in a society where you would see that? You'd be walking with your kid, and that kind of thing would be kind of ever present. And you'd also be walking, and I'm telling you stuff that that you've lived in a way. But to grow up in Shakespeare's time, where there would have been so many ruined churches and cathedrals because of Henry VIII, pulling all the Protestant churches to pieces. What would it be like to grow up in a culture and in a topography or a landscape where you're surrounded by ruins? It's a very different kind of experience than the one I had growing up. I might have been mentioning that my grandmother left Manchester, or a little town near Manchester called Glossop, in 1898 when she was about 14, and she came to Canada, and she came to the prairies, and there was nothing there. I mean, the reason she had to stop there was because that's where the railway tracks stopped. They hadn't been taken any further. Saskatchewan wasn't even a province yet. And we in North America, or at least much of North America, we are growing up in a place where, yes, there is history. There is indigenous history that goes back 10, 12, maybe 20,000 years, but it's not in evidence in the same way as it is in the United Kingdom, in so much of Europe, where you can walk around and you can see a cathedral that was built 1,000 years ago. That fascinates me. I think I actually forgot what question you asked, but it must have been an interesting one, because I've got off on all these tangents.
Yeah, I could see that. If you were hosting a dinner party and could invite 5 guests who are either dead or alive, who would you invite?
Charlie Chaplin, for sure. Shakespeare would be another one. Rosa Parks, the civil rights, or the person who became a civil rights activist in the United States because she refused to move to the back of the bus. And actually, if you go to Detroit, which is not far from where I am in Canada, you can actually see and sit in the bus that Rosa Parks was in when she made that heroic stand. What's that? Is that 3? Who else? Nelson Mandela. Oh, Cormac McCarthy, the author Cormac McCarthy, who passed away just last year at the age of 89. His writing just astonishes me. I don't know how he writes the way he does. It's almost like he invents a different kind of syntax, English syntax. And I would love to talk with him and sort of just try to understand how his mind works or worked. So I think that's 5.
Fabulous. What's the weather like where you are right now?
Right now, finally, we're at the end of winter. And this part of Canada, I'm in southern Ontario, the winters don't get that bad. We get a lot of snow, but then it melts. We're surrounded, Waterloo is surrounded pretty much on every side by the Great Lakes. So we do get a lot of precipitation, but yeah, it melts pretty quickly. And it's a beautiful day. The leaves are not out yet, but the great thing is the birds. Maybe that would be another thing I could talk about for 40 minutes, would be birds. They are starting to come back. So I haven't seen a robin yet, but I've heard robins. I've seen and heard cardinals and blackbirds, lots of crows, mourning doves, lots of little wrens and chickadees and nuthatches and things like that. I just love that when you start to hear and see and feel the trees coming to life with all of those birds. So it's just looking at my computer. It's 8 degrees, which is a little cooler than I thought, but it's supposed to get up into the 20s this week, and soon we'll be at spring. So that's always nice here.
Yes, very good. What's your favorite season?
Fall, definitely. I mean, I do like spring, but spring can be just a little too erratic, wet and even snowy one day and then really hot the next. But fall, especially in this part of Canada, is beautiful. I mean, there are so many maple trees and elm trees and silver birch trees and things like that. And in the fall, for about 4 weeks, as they start to turn colors, it's just glorious. It's one of the I don't know, wonders of humanity, I think, is looking at the trees around here. And lots of people, they do go on, they call them fall color tours, and they just drive out into the rural areas and drive through the forests and trees, and it's quite amazing. And I love that about fall, and I love the temperature as well. Usually it's coolish, but the sun is warm. In this part of Canada, summers can be really, really oppressive because it can be very humid because of all the Great Lakes. I don't like that. And the winters can be kind of bone chilling here. Even though the temperature doesn't get that cold, it's like I say, it's humid, and it's like the cold kind of creeps under your coat and clothes and just grabs at your bones. But fall here is just amazing. I mean, if you ever come to Canada, come in the fall.
Sweet. What fantasy universe would you like to live in for your whole life?
What fancy universe?
Yeah, what fantasy universe would
Oh,
you like to live your
oh,
life?
oh my gosh. Well, just yesterday I was in a meeting, and I forget, somebody or other, one of my colleagues was saying, well, we'll try this, but it won't be perfect. And I have never been very enthusiastic about perfection. I think perfection is way overrated. And one passage from literature from Wallace Stevens, the American poet that I like, he said something like, "The imperfect is our paradise." And I think what he meant was, the imperfect is like this field in which we can endeavor and in which we can challenge ourselves and try to do things. Perfection, I think, would be absolutely awful, just boring, I think. So I don't want a universe that would be perfect, but I would also like to be in a universe in which there isn't conflict and wars and, millions of people being displaced by civil war and things like that. I mean, all of that is just so unnecessary. We bring that on ourselves as humans. We don't have any control over whether, I don't know, a hurricane happens or, awful things can still happen. But there are so many things that we as humans, if we would just get our act together and listen to each other and listen to each other's stories, we could do away with so much human misery, I think. And I would like to live in a universe that doesn't have the kind of human misery that currently exists.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah.
And that is all we have for this episode. It's great having you on, Steve, talking about your work as a writer and an educator and a lot of other things. It's been great.
Thank you. I've really, really enjoyed your question. They're fabulous.
Welcome.
Okay.
And until next time, stay opinionated.
Okay. Thanks so much.